Oh, yeah. Pale.
Good. All signed and sealed.
Prepare. What are you up?
Oh, yeah. Pale blood.
Good. All signed and sealed. Now, let's begin the transfusion. Oh, don't you worry. Whatever happens, you may think it all a mere
Oh, yeah.
calm if Aragon was hurt or dead. Where is he, then? Demanded Nasuda. What trouble has he gotten himself into now? A raucous commotion filled the clearing as Jormungandr and his men directed the onlookers back to their tents, laying about them with swagger sticks whenever the reluctant warriors lingered or protested. Several scuffles broke out, but the captains under Jormungandr quickly overwhelmed the culprits, so as to prevent the violence from taking root and spreading. Fortunately, the Urgals, at the word of their war chief, Garsvog, left without incident, although Garsvog himself advanced toward Nasuda, as did King Orin and the dwarf Narheim. Nasuda felt the ground tremble under her feet as the 8.5-foot tall Urgal approached her. He lifted his bony chin, baring his throat as was the custom of his race, and said, "What means this, Lady Nightstalker?" The shape of his jaws and teeth, coupled with his accent, made it difficult for Nasuda to understand him. "Yes, I'd bloody well like an explanation myself," said Orin. His face was red. "And I," said Narheim. It occurred to Nasuda, as she regarded them, that this was probably the first time in thousands of years that members of so many of the races of Algesia had gathered together in peace. The only ones missing were the Rizak and their mounts, and Nasuda knew no sane being would ever invite those foul creatures into their secret councils. She pointed at Saphira and said, "She shall provide the answers you desire." Just as the last stragglers quit the clearing, a torrent of air rushed across Nasuda as Saphira swooped to the ground, raking her wings to slow herself before alighting upon her rear legs. She dropped to all fours, and a dull boom resounded across the camp. Unbuckling themselves from her saddle, Roran and Katrina quickly dismounted. Striding forward, Nasuda examined Katrina. She was curious to see what kind of woman could inspire a man to undertake such extraordinary feats in order to rescue her. The young woman before her was strong boned, with the pallid complexion of an invalid, a maid of copper hair, and a dress so torn and filthy, it was impossible to determine what it might have looked like originally. In spite of the toll her captivity had taken, it was apparent to Nasuda that Katrina was attractive enough, but not what the bards would call a great beauty. However, she possessed a certain force of gait and bearing that made Nasuda think that if Roran had been the one captured, Katrina would have been just as capable of rousing the villagers of Carvahal, getting them south to Serta, fighting in the Battle of the Burning Plains, and then continuing on to Helgrin, all for the sake of her beloved. Even when she noticed Garsvog, Katrina did not flinch or quail but remained standing where she was, next to Roran. Roran bowed to Nasuda and, swiveling, also to King Orin. "My lady," he said, his face grave. "Your Majesty, if I may, this is my betrothed, Katrina." She curtsied to them both. "Welcome to the Varden, Katrina," said Nasuda. "We have all heard your name here, on account of Roran's uncommon devotion. Songs of his love for you already spread across the land." "You are most welcome," added Orin. "Most welcome indeed." Nasuda noticed that the king had eyes only for Katrina, as did every man present, including the dwarves, and Nasuda was certain they would be recounting tales of Katrina's charms to their comrades in arms before the night was out. What Roran had done on her behalf elevated her far above ordinary women. It made her an object of mystery, fascination, and allure to the warriors. That anyone should sacrifice so much for another person meant, by reason of the price paid, that person must be unusually precious. Katrina blushed and smiled. "Thank you," she said. Along with her embarrassment at such attentions, a hint of pride colored her expression, as if she knew how remarkable Roran was and delighted in having captured his heart, of all the women in Algesia. He was hers, and that was all the status or treasure she desired. A pang of loneliness shot through Nasuda. "I wish I had what they have," she thought. Her responsibilities prevented her from entertaining girlish dreams of romance and marriage, and certainly children, unless she were to arrange a marriage of convenience for the good of the Varden. She had often considered doing that with Orin, but her nerve always failed her. Still, she was content with her lot and did not begrudge Katrina and Roran their happiness. Her cause was what she cared about. Defeating Galbatorix was far more important than something as trifling as marriage. Most everyone got married, but how many had the opportunity to oversee the birth of a new age? "I'm not myself this evening," realized Nasuda. "My wounds have set my thoughts a-humming like a nest of bees." Shaking herself, she looked past Roran and Katrina to Saphira. Nasuda opened up the barriers she usually maintained around her mind so she might hear what Saphira had to say and then asked, "Where is he?" With the dry rustle of scales sliding over scales, Saphira crept forward and lowered her neck so her head was directly in front of Nasuda, Arya, and Angela. The dragon's left eye sparkled with blue fire. She sniffed twice, and her crimson tongue darted out of her mouth. Hot, moist breath ruffled the lace collar on Nasuda's dress. Nasuda swallowed as Saphira's consciousness brushed against her own. Saphira felt unlike any other being Nasuda had encountered. Ancient, alien, and both ferocious and gentle. That, along with Saphira's imposing physical presence, always reminded Nasuda that if Saphira wanted to eat them, she could. It was impossible, Nasuda believed, to be complacent around a dragon. I smell blood, said Saphira. Who has hurt you, Nasuda? Name them, and I shall tear them from neck to groin and bring you their heads for trophies. There's no need for you to tear anyone apart. Not yet, at least. I wielded the knife myself. However, this is the wrong time to delve into the matter. Right now, all I care about is Aragon's whereabouts. Aragon, said Saphira, decided to remain in the Empire. For a few seconds, Nasuda was unable to move or think. Then a mounting sense of doom replaced her stunned denial of Saphira's revelation. The others reacted in various ways as well, from which Nasuda deduced Saphira had spoken to them all at once. How could you allow him to stay? She asked. Small tongues of fire rippled in Saphira's nostrils as she snorted. Aragon made his own choice. I could not stop him. He insists upon doing what he thinks is right, no matter the consequences for him or the rest of Algesia. I could shake him like a hatchling, but I'm proud of him. Fear not, he can take care of himself. So far, no misfortune has befallen him. I would know if he was hurt. Arya spoke. And why did he make this choice, Saphira? It would be faster for me to show you rather than explain with words. May I? They all indicated their consent. A river of Saphira's memories poured into Nasuda. She saw Black Helgrind from above a layer of clouds, heard Aragon, Roran, and Saphira discussing how best to attack, watched them discover the Razak's lair, and experienced Saphira's epic battle with the Lether Blaka. The procession of images fascinated Nasuda. She had been born in the Empire but could remember nothing of it. This was the first time as an adult that she had looked upon anything besides the wild fringes of Galbatorix's holdings. Lastly came Aragon and his confrontation with Saphira. Saphira attempted to hide it, but the anguish she felt over leaving Aragon was still so raw and piercing, Nasuda had to dry her cheeks with the bandages on her forearms. However, the reasons Aragon gave for staying, killing the last Razak and exploring the remainder of Helgrind, were reasons Nasuda deemed inadequate. She frowned. Aragon may be rash, but he's certainly not foolish enough to endanger everything we seek to accomplish merely so he can visit a few caves and drain the last bitter dregs of his revenge. There must be another explanation. She wondered whether she should press Saphira for the truth, but she knew Saphira would not withhold such information on a whim. Perhaps she wants to discuss it in private, she thought. Blast it, exclaimed King Orin. Aragon could not have picked a worse time to set off on his own. What matters a single Razak when Galbatorix's entire army resides but a few miles from us? We have to get him back. Angela laughed. She was knitting a sock using 5 bone needles, which clicked and clapped and scraped against each other with a steady, peculiar rhythm. How? He'll be traveling during the day, and Saphira daren't fly around searching for him when the sun's up and anyone might spot her and alert Galbatorix. Yes, but he's our rider. We cannot sit by idly while he remains in the midst of our enemies. I agree, said Narheim. However it is done, we must ensure his safe return. Grimstian's Borith Hrothgar adopted Aragon into his family and clan. That is mine own clan, as you know, and we owe him the loyalty of our law and our blood. Arya knelt and, to Nasuda's surprise, began to unlace and retie the upright sections of her boots. Holding one of the cords between her teeth, Arya said, Saphira, where exactly was Aragon when you last touched his mind? In the entrance to Helgrind. And have you any idea what path he intended to follow? He did not yet know himself. Springing to her feet, Arya said, then I shall have to look everywhere I can. Like a deer, she bounded forward and ran across the clearing, vanishing among the tents beyond as she sped northward as fast and light as the wind itself. Arya, no, shouted Nasuda, but the elf was already gone. Hopelessness threatened to engulf Nasuda as she stared after her. The center is crumbling, she thought. Grasping the edges of the mismatched pieces of armor that covered his torso as if to tear them off, Garsvog said to Nasuda, you want me to follow, Lady Nightstalker? I cannot run as fast as little elves, but I can run as long. No, stay. Arya can pass for human at a distance, but soldiers would hunt you down the moment some farmer caught sight of you. I am used to being hunted. But not in the middle of the Empire, with hundreds of Galbatorix's men wandering the countryside. No, Arya will have to fend for herself. I pray that she can find Aragon and keep him safe, for without him, we are doomed. Escape and evasion. Aragon's feet drummed against the ground. The pounding beat of his stride originated in his heels and ran up his legs, through his hips, and along his spine until it terminated at the base of his skull, where the recurring impact jarred his teeth and exacerbated the headache that seemed to worsen with every passing mile. The monotonous music of his running had annoyed him at first, but before long, it lulled him into a trance-like state where he did not think, but moved. As Aragon's boots descended, he heard brittle stalks of grass snap like twigs and glimpsed puffs of dirt rising from the cracked soil. He guessed it had been at least a month since it last rained in this part of Algesia. The dry air leached the moisture from his breath, leaving his throat raw. No matter how much he drank, he could not compensate for the amount of water the sun and the wind stole from him. Thus his headache. Helgrind was far behind him. However, he had made slower progress than he had hoped. Hundreds of Galbatorix's patrols, containing both soldiers and magicians, swarmed across the land, and he often had to hide in order to avoid them. That they were searching for him, he had no doubt. The previous evening, he had even spotted Thorn riding low on the western horizon. He had immediately shielded his mind, thrown himself into a ditch, and stayed there for half an hour, until Thorn dipped back down below the edge of the world. Aragon had decided to travel on established roads and trails wherever possible. The events of the past week had pushed him to the limits of his physical and emotional endurance. He preferred to allow his body to rest and recover, rather than strain himself forging through brambles, over hills, and across muddy rivers. The time for desperate, violent exertion would come again, but now was not it. So long as he held to the roads, he dared not run as fast as he was capable. Indeed, it would be wiser to avoid running altogether. A fair number of villages and outbuildings were scattered throughout the area. If any of the inhabitants observed a lone man sprinting across the countryside as if a pack of wolves were chasing him, the spectacle would be sure to arouse curiosity and suspicion and might even inspire a frightened crofter to report the incident to the Empire. That could prove fatal for Aragon, whose greatest defense was the cloak of anonymity. He only ran now because he had encountered no living creature, except a long snake sunning itself, for over a league. Returning to the Varden was Aragon's primary concern, and it rankled him to plod along like a common vagabond. Still, he appreciated the opportunity to be by himself. He had not been alone, truly alone, since he found Saphira's egg in the spine. Always her thoughts had rubbed against his, or Brahm or Murta or someone else had been at his side. In addition to the burden of constant companionship, Aragon had spent all the months since he had left Palantir Valley engaged in arduous training, breaking only for travel or to take part in the tumult of battle. Never before had he concentrated so intensely for so long or dealt with such huge amounts of worry and fear. He welcomed his solitude, then, and the peace it brought. The absence of voices, including his own, was a sweet lullaby that, for a short while, washed away his fear of the future. He had no desire to scry Saphira, although they were too far apart to touch each other's minds. His bond with her would tell him if she was hurt, or to contact Arya or Nasuda and hear their angry words. Far better, he thought, to listen to the songs of the flitting birds and the sighing of the breeze through the grass and leafy branches. The sound of jingling harnesses, clomping hoofs, and men's voices jarred Aragon out of his reverie. Alarmed, he stopped and glanced around, trying to determine from what direction the men were approaching. A pair of cackling jackdaws spiraled upward from a nearby ravine. The only cover close to Aragon was a small thicket of juniper trees. He sprinted toward it and dove under the drooping branches just as 6 soldiers emerged from the ravine and rode cantering out onto the thin dirt road not 10 feet away. Normally, Aragon would have sensed their presence long before they got so close, but since Thorn's distant appearance, he had kept his mind walled off from his surroundings. The soldiers reined in their horses and milled around in the middle of the road, arguing among themselves. "I'm telling you, I saw something," one of them shouted. He was of medium height, with ruddy cheeks and a yellow beard. His heart hammering, Aragon struggled to keep his breathing slow and quiet. He touched his brow to ensure the cloth strip he had tied around his head still covered his upswept eyebrows and pointed ears. "I wish I were still wearing my armor," he thought. In order to avoid attracting unwanted attention, he had made himself a pack, using dead branches and a square of canvas he had bartered from a tinker, and placed his armor within it. Now he dared not remove and don his armor, for fear the soldiers would hear. The soldier with the yellow beard climbed down from his bay charger and walked along the edge of the road, studying the ground and the juniper trees beyond. Like every member of Galbatorix's army, the soldier wore a red tunic embroidered with gold thread in the outline of a jagged tongue of fire. The thread sparkled as he moved. His armor was simple: a helmet, a tapered shield, and a leather brigandine, indicating he was little more than a mounted footman. As for arms, he bore a spear in his right hand and a longsword on his left hip. As the soldier approached his location, spurs clinking, Aragon began to whisper a complex spell in the ancient language. The words poured off his tongue in an unbroken stream, until, to his alarm, he mispronounced a particularly difficult cluster of vowels and had to start the incantation anew. The soldier took another step toward him. And another. Just as the soldier paused in front of him, Aragon completed the spell and felt his strength ebb as the magic took effect. He was an instant too late, however, to completely escape detection, for the soldier exclaimed, "Aha!" and brushed aside the branches, exposing Aragon. Aragon did not move. The soldier peered directly at him and frowned. "What the?" he muttered. He jabbed his spear into the thicket, missing Aragon's face by less than an inch. Aragon dug his nails into his palms as a tremor racked his clenched muscles. "Ah, blast it," said the soldier, and released the branches, which sprang back to their original positions, hiding Aragon once more. "What was it?" called another of the men. "Nothing," said the soldier, returning to his companions. He removed his helmet and wiped his brow. "My eyes are playing tricks on me. What does that bastard Braithen expect of us? We've hardly gotten a wink of sleep these past 2 days. The king must be desperate to drive us so hard. To be honest, I'd rather not find whoever it is we're searching for. It's not that I'm faint-hearted, but anyone who gives Galbatorix cause is best avoided by the likes of us. Let Murtaugh and his monster of a dragon catch our mysterious fugitive, E.H. Unless we be searching for Murtaugh," suggested a third man. "You heard what Morzan Spawn said well as I did." An uncomfortable silence settled over the soldiers. Then the one who was on the ground vaulted back onto his charger, wrapped the reins around his left hand, and said, "Keep your yap shut, Durwood. You talk too much." With that, the group of 6 spurred their steeds forward and continued north on the road. As the sound of the horses faded, Aragon ended the spell, then rubbed his eyes with his fists and rested his hands on his knees. A long, low laugh escaped him, and he shook his head, amused by how outlandish his predicament was compared with his upbringing in Palangar Valley. "I certainly never imagined this happening to me," he thought. The spell he had used contained 2 parts. The first bent rays of light around his body so he appeared invisible, and the second hopefully prevented other spellweavers from detecting his use of magic. The spell's main drawbacks were that it could not conceal footprints, therefore one had to remain stone still while using it, and it often failed to completely eliminate a person's shadow. Kicking his way out of the thicket, Aragon stretched his arms high over his head and then faced the ravine from whence the soldiers had emerged. A single question occupied him as he resumed his journey. What had Murtaugh said? Ah! The gauze-like illusion of Aragon's waking dreams vanished as he tore at the air with his hands. He twisted nearly in half as he rolled away from where he had been lying. Scrabbling backward, he pushed himself to his feet and raised his arms in front of himself to deflect oncoming blows. The dark of night surrounded him. Above, the impartial stars continued to gyrate in their endless celestial dance. Below, not a creature stirred, nor could he hear anything but the gentle wind caressing the grass. Aragon stabbed outward with his mind, convinced that someone was about to attack him. He extended himself over 1,000 feet in every direction but found no one else in the vicinity. At last he lowered his hands. His chest heaved, and his skin burned, and he stank of sweat. In his mind, a tempest roared, a whirlwind of flashing blades and severed limbs. For a moment, he thought he was in Farthandur, fighting the Urgals, and then on the burning plains, crossing swords with men like himself. Each location was so real, he would have sworn some strange magic had transported him backward through space and time. He saw standing before him the men and the Urgals whom he had slain. They appeared so real, he wondered if they would speak. And while he no longer bore the scars of his wounds, his body remembered the many injuries he had suffered, and he shuddered as he again felt swords and arrows piercing his flesh. With a shapeless howl, Aragon fell to his knees and wrapped his arms around his stomach, hugging himself as he rocked back and forth. "It's all right. It's all right." He pressed his forehead against the ground, curling into a hard, tight ball. His breath was hot against his belly. "What's wrong with me?" None of the epics Brom had recited in Carbajal mentioned that such visions had bedeviled the heroes of old. None of the warriors Aragon had met in the Varden seemed troubled by the blood they shed. And even though Roran admitted he disliked killing, he did not wake up screaming in the middle of the night. I'm weak, thought Aragon. A man should not feel like this. A rider should not feel like this. Darrow or Brom would have been fine, I know. They did what needed to be done, and that was that. No crying about it, no endless worrying or gnashing of teeth. I'm weak. Jumping up, he paced around his nest in the grass, trying to calm himself. After half an hour, when apprehension still clenched his chest in an iron grip and his skin itched as if 1,000 ants crawled underneath it and he started at the slightest noise, Aragon grabbed his pack and set off at a dead run. He cared not what lay before him in the unknown darkness, nor who might notice his headlong flight. He only sought to escape his nightmares. His mind had turned against him, and he could not rely upon rational thought to dispel his panic. His one recourse, then, was to trust in the ancient animal wisdom of his flesh, which told him to move. If he ran fast and hard enough, perhaps he could anchor himself in the moment. Perhaps the thrashing of his arms, the thudding of his feet on dirt, the slick chill of sweat under his arms, and a myriad of other sensations would, by their sheer weight and number, force him to forget. Perhaps. A flock of starlings darted across the afternoon sky, like fish through the ocean. Aragon squinted at them. In Palanquer Valley, when the starlings returned after winter, they often formed groups so large, they transformed day into night. This flock was not that large, yet it reminded him of evenings spent drinking mint tea with Darrow and Roran on the porch of their house, watching a rustling black cloud turn and twist overhead. Lost in memory, he stopped and sat on a rock so he could retie the laces on his boots. The weather had changed. It was cool now, and a gray smudge to the west hinted at the possibility of a storm. The vegetation was lusher, with moss and reeds and thick clumps of green grass. Several miles away, 5 hills dotted the otherwise smooth land. A stand of thick oak trees adorned the central hill. Above the hazy mounds of foliage, Aragon glimpsed the crumbling walls of a long-abandoned building, constructed by some race in ages past. Curiosity aroused, he decided to break his fast among the ruins. They were sure to contain plentiful game, and foraging would provide him with an excuse to do a bit of exploring before continuing on his way. Aragon arrived at the base of the first hill an hour later, where he found the remnants of an ancient road paved with squares of stone. He followed it toward the ruins, wondering at its strange construction, for it was unlike any human, elf, or dwarf work he was familiar with. The shadows under the oak trees chilled Aragon as he climbed the central hill. Near the summit, the ground leveled off underneath his feet and the thicket opened up, and he entered a large glade. A broken tower stood there. The lower part of the tower was wide and ribbed, like the trunk of a tree. Then the structure narrowed and rose toward the sky for over 30 feet, ending in a sharp, jagged line. The upper half of the tower lay on the ground, shattered into innumerable fragments. Excitement stirred within Aragon. He suspected that he had found an elven outpost, erected long before the destruction of the riders. No other race had the skill or inclination to build such a structure. Then he spotted the vegetable garden at the opposite side of the glade. A single man sat hunched among the rows of plants, eating a patch of snap peas. Shadows covered his downturned face. His gray beard was so long, it lay piled in his lap like a mound of uncombed wool. Without looking up, the man said, "Well, are you going to help me finish these peas or not? There's a meal in it for you if you do." Aragon hesitated, unsure what to do. Then he thought, why should I be afraid of an old hermit? And walked over to the garden. "I'm Bergen, son of Darrow." The man grunted. "Tenga, son of Ingvar." The armor in Aragon's pack rattled as he dropped it to the ground. For the next hour, he labored in silence along with Tenga. He knew he should not stay for so long, but he enjoyed the task, it kept him from brooding. As he weeded, he allowed his mind to expand and touch the multitude of living things within the glade. He welcomed the sense of unity he shared with them. When they had removed every last bit of grass, purslane, and dandelions from around the peas, Aragon followed Tenga to a narrow door set into the front of the tower, through which was a spacious kitchen and dining room. In the middle of the room, a circular staircase coiled up to the second story. Books, scrolls, and sheets of loose-bound vellum covered every available surface, including a goodly portion of the floor. Tenga pointed at the small pile of branches in the fireplace. With a pop and a crackle, the wood burst into flame. Aragon tensed, ready to grapple physically and mentally with Tenga. The other man did not seem to notice his reaction and continued to bustle about the kitchen, procuring mugs, dishes, knives, and various leftovers for their lunch. He muttered to himself in an undertone while he did. Every sense alert, Aragon sank onto the bare corner of a nearby chair. He didn't utter the ancient language, he thought. Even if he said the spell in his head, he still risked death or worse to start a mere cook fire. For as Oromas had taught Aragon, words were the means by which one controlled the release of magic. To cast a spell without the structure of language binding that motive power was to risk having a stray thought or emotion distort the result. Aragon gazed around the chamber, searching for clues about his host. He spotted an open scroll that displayed columns of words from the ancient language and recognized it as a compendium of true names similar to those he had studied in Elsmera. Magicians coveted such scrolls in books and would sacrifice almost anything to obtain them, for with them one could learn new words for a spell and also record therein words one had discovered. Few, however, were able to acquire a compendium, for they were exceedingly rare and those who already owned them almost never parted with them willingly. It was unusual, then, for Tenga to possess one such compendium, but to Aragon's amazement, he saw 6 others throughout the room, in addition to writings on subjects ranging from history to mathematics to astronomy to botany. A mug of ale and a plate with bread, cheese, and a slice of cold meat pie appeared in front of him as Tenga shoved the dishes under his nose. "Thank you," said Aragon, accepting them. Tenga ignored him and sat cross-legged next to the fireplace. He continued to grumble and mutter into his beard as he devoured his lunch. After Aragon had scraped his plate clean and drained the last drops of the fine harvest ale, and Tenga had also nearly completed his repast, Aragon could not help but ask, "Did the elves build this tower?" Tenga fixed him with a pointed gaze, as if the question made him doubt Aragon's intelligence. "Aye, the tricky elves built Edgwar Ithindra. What is it you do here? Are you all alone, or?" "I search for the answer," exclaimed Tenga, "a key to an unopened door, the secret of the trees and the plants. Fire, heat, lightning, light, most do not know the question and wander in ignorance. Others know the question but fear what the answer will mean. Bah, for thousands of years we have lived like savages. Savages. I shall end that. I shall usher in the age of light, and all shall praise my deed. Pray tell, what exactly do you search for?" A frown twisted Tenga's face. "You don't know the question. I thought you might. But no, I was mistaken. Still, I see you understand my search. You search for a different answer, but you search nevertheless. The same brand burns in your heart as burns in mine. Who else but a fellow pilgrim can appreciate what we must sacrifice to find the answer?" "The answer to what?" "To the question we choose." He's mad, thought Aragon. Casting about for something with which he could distract Tenga, his gaze lit upon a row of small wood animal statues arranged on the sill below a teardrop-shaped window. "Those are beautiful," he said, indicating the statues. "Who made them?" "She did, before she left. She was always making things." Tenga bounded upright and placed the tip of his left index finger on the first of the statues. Here the squirrel with his waving tail, he so bright and swift and full of laughing gibbs. His finger drifted to the next statue in line. Here the savage boar, so deadly with his slashing tusks. Here the raven with. Tenga paid no attention as Aragon backed away, nor when he lifted the latch to the door and slipped out of Edgwar Ithindra. Shouldering his pack, Aragon trotted down through the crown of oak trees and away from the cluster of 5 hills and the demented spellcaster who resided among them. Throughout the rest of that day in the nest, the number of people on the road increased until it seemed to Aragon as if a new group was always appearing over a hill. Most were refugees, although soldiers and other men of business were also present. Aragon avoided those he couldn't trudge along with his chin tucked against his collar the rest of the time. That practice, however, forced him to spend the night in the village of Eastcroft, 20 miles north of Melian. He had intended to abandon the road long before he arrived at Eastcroft and find a sheltered hollow or cave where he might rest until morn, but because of his relative unfamiliarity with the land, he misjudged the distance and came upon the village while in the company of 3 men-at-arms. Leaving then, less than an hour from the safety of Eastcroft's walls and gates and the comfort of a warm bed, would have inspired even the slowest dullard to ask why he was trying to avoid the village. So Aragon set his teeth and silently rehearsed the stories he had concocted to explain his trip. The bloated sun was 2 fingers above the horizon when Aragon first beheld Eastcroft, a medium-sized village enclosed by a tall palisade. It was almost dark by the time he finally arrived at the village and entered through the gate. Behind him, he heard a sentry ask the men-at-arms if anyone else had been close behind them on the road. "Not that I could tell." "That's good enough for me," replied the sentry. "If there are laggards, they'll have to wait until tomorrow to get in." To another man on the opposite side of the gate, he shouted, "Close it up." Together they pushed the 15-foot-tall iron-bound doors shut and barred them with 4 oak beams as thick as Aragon's chest. They must expect a siege, thought Aragon, and then smiled at his own blindness. Well, who doesn't expect trouble in these times? A few months ago, he would have worried about being trapped in Eastcroft, but now he was confident he could scale the fortifications barehanded and, if he concealed himself with magic, escape unnoticed in the gloom of night. He chose to stay, however, for he was tired and casting a spell might attract the attention of nearby magicians, if there were any. Before he took more than a few steps down the muddy lane that led to the town square, a watchman accosted him, thrusting a lantern toward his face. "Hold there. You've not been to Eastcroft before, have you?" "This is my first visit," said Aragon. The stubby watchman bobbed his head. "And have you family or friends here to welcome you?" "No, I don't." "What brings you to Eastcroft, then?" "Nothing. I'm traveling south to fetch my sister's family and bring them back to Drosleona." Aragon's story seemed to have no effect on the watchman. "Perhaps he doesn't believe me," Aragon speculated. "Or perhaps he's heard so many accounts like mine, they've ceased to matter to him." "Then you want the Wayfarer's house, by the main well. Go there and you will find food and lodging. And while you stay here in Eastcroft, let me warn you, we don't tolerate murder, thievery, or lechery in these parts. We have sturdy stocks and gallows, and they have had their share of tenants. My meaning is clear." "Yes, sir." "Then go, and be you of good fortune. But wait, what is your name, stranger?" "Bergen." With that, the watchman strode away, returning to his evening rounds. Aragon waited until the combined mass of several houses concealed the lantern the watchman carried before wandering over to the message board mounted to the left of the gates. There, nailed over a half-dozen posters of various criminals, were 2 sheets of parchment almost 3 feet long. One depicted Aragon, one depicted Roran, and both labeled them traitors to the crown. Aragon examined the posters with interest and marveled at the reward offered, and earldom a piece to whoever captured them. The drawing of Roran was a good likeness and even included the beard he had grown since fleeing Carvajal, but Aragon's portrait showed him as he had been before the Blood Oath celebration, when he still appeared fully human. How things have changed, thought Aragon. Moving on, he slipped through the village until he located the Wayfarer's house. The common room had a low ceiling with tar-stained timbers. Yellow tallow candles provided a soft, flickering light and thickened the air with intersecting layers of smoke. Sand and rushes covered the floor, and the mixture crunched underneath Aragon's boots. To his left were tables and chairs and a large fireplace, where an urchin turned a pig on a spit. Opposite this was a long bar, a fortress with raised drawbridges that protected casks of lager, ale, and stout from the horde of thirsty men who assailed it from all sides. A good 60 people filled the room, crowding it to an uncomfortable level. The roar of conversation would have been startling enough to Aragon after his time on the road, but with his sensitive hearing, he felt as if he stood in the middle of a pounding waterfall. It was hard for him to concentrate upon any one voice. As soon as he caught hold of a word or a phrase, it was swept away by another utterance. Off in one corner, a trio of minstrels was singing and playing a comic version of Sweet Ethred o' Douth, which did nothing to improve the clamor. Wincing at the barrage of noise, Aragon wormed his way through the crowd until he reached the bar. He wanted to talk with the serving woman, but she was so busy. 5 minutes passed before she looked at him and asked, "Your pleasure?" Strands of hair hung over her sweaty face. "Have you a room to let, or a corner where I could spend the night?" "I wouldn't know. The mistress of the house is the one you should speak to about that." "She'll be down directly," said the serving woman, and flicked a hand at a rank of gloomy stairs. While he waited, Aragon rested against the bar and studied the people in the room. They were a motley assortment. About half he guessed were villagers from Eastcroft come to enjoy a night of drinking. Of the rest, the majority were men and women, families oftentimes, who were migrating to safer parts. It was easy for him to identify them by their frayed shirts and dirty pants and by how they huddled in their chairs and peered at anyone who came near. However, they studiously avoided looking at the last and smallest group of patrons in the Wayfarer's house, Galbatorix's soldiers. The men in red tunics were louder than anyone else. They laughed and shouted and banged on tabletops with their armored fists while they quaffed beer and groped any maid foolish enough to walk by them. Do they behave like that because they know no one dares oppose them and they enjoy demonstrating their power? Wondered Aragon, or because they were forced to join Galbatorix's army and seek to dull their sense of shame and fear with their rebels. Now the minstrels were singing. So with her hair flying, Sweet Ethred o' Douth ran to Lord Adel and cried, Free my lover. Else a witch shall turn you into a woolly goat. Lord Adele, he laughed and said, no witch shall turn me into a woolly goat. The crowd shifted and granted Aragon a view of a table pushed against one wall. At it sat a lone woman, her face hidden by the drawn hood of her dark traveling cloak. 4 men surrounded her, big, beefy farmers with leathery necks and cheeks flushed with the fever of alcohol. 2 of them were leaning against the wall on either side of the woman, looming over her, while one sat grinning in a chair turned around backward and the 4th stood with his left foot on the edge of the table and was bent forward over his knee. The men spoke and gestured, their movements careless. Although Aragon could not hear or see what the woman said, it was obvious to him that her response angered the farmers, for they scowled and swelled their chests, puffing themselves up like roosters. One of them shook a finger at her. To Aragon, they appeared decent, hard-working men who had lost their manners in the depths of their tankards, a mistake he had witnessed often enough on feast days in Carbajal. Darrow had had little respect for men who knew they could not hold their beer and yet insisted on embarrassing themselves in public. It's unseemly, he had said. What's more, if you drink to forget your lot in life and not for pleasure, you ought to do it where you won't disturb anyone. The man to the left of the woman suddenly reached down and hooked a finger underneath the edge of her hood, as if to toss it back. So quickly that Aragon barely saw, the woman lifted her right hand and grasped the man's wrist, but then released it and returned to her previous position. Aragon doubted that anyone else in the common room, including the man she touched, had noticed her actions. The hood collapsed around her neck, and Aragon stiffened, astounded. The woman was human, but she resembled Arya. The only differences between them were her eyes, which were round and level, not slanted like a cat's, and her ears, which lacked the pointed tips of an elf's. She was just as beautiful as the Arya Aragon knew, but in a less exotic, more familiar way. Without hesitation, Aragon probed toward the woman with his mind. He had to know who she really was. As soon as he touched her consciousness, a mental blow struck back at Aragon, destroying his concentration, and then in the confines of his skull, he heard a deafening voice exclaim, Aragon. Arya. Their eyes met for a moment before the crowd thickened again and hit her. Aragon hurried across the room to her table, prying apart the bodies packed close together to clear himself a path. The farmers looked askance at him when he emerged from the press, and one said, "You're awful rude, barging in on us uninvited like. Best make yourself scarce, E.H." In as diplomatic a voice as he could muster, Aragon said, "It seems to me, gentlemen, that the lady would rather be left alone. Now, you wouldn't ignore the wishes of an honest woman, would you?" "An honest woman," laughed the nearest man. "No honest woman travels alone." "Then let me set your concern to rest, for I am her brother, and we are going to live with our uncle in Dros Leona." The 4 men exchanged uneasy glances. 3 of them began to edge away from Arya, but the largest planted himself a few inches in front of Aragon and, breathing upon his face, said, "I'm not sure I believe you, friend. You're just trying to drive us away so you can be with her yourself." "He's not far off," thought Aragon. Speaking quietly enough that only that man could hear, Aragon said, "I assure you, she is my sister. Please, sir, I have no quarrel with you. Won't you go? Not when I think you're a lying milksop. Sir, be reasonable. There's no need for this unpleasantness. The night is young, and there's drink and music aplenty. Let's not quarrel about such a petty misunderstanding. It's beneath us." To Aragon's relief, the other man relaxed after a few seconds and uttered a scornful grunt. "I wouldn't want to fight a youngling like you anyway," he said. Turning around, he lumbered toward the bar with his friends. Keeping his gaze fixed upon the crowd, Aragon slipped behind the table and sat next to Arya. "What are you doing here?" he asked, barely moving his lips. "Searching for you." Surprised, he glanced at her, and she raised a curved eyebrow. He looked back at the throng of people and, pretending to smile, asked, "Are you alone?" "No longer. Did you rent a bed for the night?" He shook his head. "Good. I already have a room. We can talk there." They rose in unison, and he followed her to the stairs at the back of the common room. The worn treads creaked under their feet as they climbed to a hallway on the 2nd story. A single candle illuminated the dingy, wood-paneled corridor. Arya led the way to the last door on the right, and from within the voluminous sleeve of her cloak, she produced an iron key. Unlocking the door, she entered the room, waited for Aragon to cross the threshold after her, and then closed and secured the door again. A faint orange glow penetrated the lead-lined window across from Aragon. The glow came from a lantern hanging on the other side of Eastcroft's town square. By it, he was able to make out the shape of an oil lamp on a low table to his right. Brisinger, whispered Aragon, and lit the wick with a spark from his finger. Even with the lamp burning, the room was still dark. The chamber contained the same paneling as the hallway, and the chestnut-colored wood absorbed most of the light that struck it and made the room seem small and heavy, as if a great weight pressed inward. Aside from the table, the only other piece of furniture was a narrow bed with a single blanket thrown over the ticking. A small bag of supplies rested on the mattress. Aragon and Arya stood facing each other. Then Aragon reached up and removed the cloth strip tied around his head, and Arya unfastened the brooch that held her cloak around her shoulders and placed the garment on the bed. She wore a forest green dress, the first dress Aragon had seen her in. It was a strange experience for Aragon to have their appearances reversed, so that he was the one who looked like an elf, and Arya a human. The change did nothing to diminish his regard for her, but it did make him more comfortable in her presence, for she was less alien to him now. It was Arya who broke the silence. Saphira said you stayed behind to kill the last Razak and to explore the rest of Helgrin. Is that the truth? It's part of the truth. And what is the whole truth? Aragon knew that nothing less would satisfy her. Promise me that you won't share what I'm about to tell you with anyone unless I give you permission. I promise, she said in the ancient language. Then he told her about finding Sloane, why he decided not to bring him back to the Varden, the curse he had laid upon the butcher, and the chance he had given Sloane to redeem himself, at least partially, and to regain his sight. Aragon finished by saying, whatever happens, Roran and Katrina can never learn that Sloane is still alive. If they do, there'll be no end of trouble. Arya sat on the edge of the bed and, for a long while, stared at the lamp and its jumping flame. Then, you should have killed him. Maybe, but I couldn't. Just because you find your task distasteful is no reason to shirk it. You were a coward. Aragon bridled at her accusation. Was I? Anyone with a knife could have killed Sloane. What I did was far harder. Physically, but not morally. I didn't kill him because I thought it was wrong. Aragon frowned with concentration as he searched for the words to explain himself. I wasn't afraid, not that. Not after going into battle. It was something else. I will kill in war. But I won't take it upon myself to decide who lives and who dies. I don't have the experience or the wisdom. Every man has a line he won't cross, Arya, and I found mine when I looked upon Sloane. Even if I had Galbatorix as my captive, I would not kill him. I would take him to Nasuda and King Orin, and if they condemned him to death, then I would happily lop off his head, but not before. Call it weakness if you will, but that is how I am made, and I won't apologize for it. You will be a tool, then, wielded by others. I will serve the people as best I can. I've never aspired to lead. Algesia does not need another tyrant king. Arya rubbed her temples. Why does everything have to be so complicated with you, Aragon? No matter where you go, you seem to get yourself mired in difficult situations. It's as if you make an effort to walk through every bramble in the land. Your mother said much the same. I'm not surprised. Very well, let it be. Neither of us is about to change our opinions, and we have more pressing concerns than arguing about justice and morality. In the future, though, you would do well to remember who you are and what you mean to the races of Algesia. I never forgot. Aragon paused, waiting for her response, but Arya let his statement pass unchallenged. Sitting on the edge of the table, he said, you didn't have to come looking for me, you know. I was fine. Of course I did. How did you find me? I guessed which route you would take from Helgrin. Luckily for me, my guess placed me 40 miles west of here, and that was close enough for me to locate you by listening to the whispers of the land. I don't understand. A rider does not walk unnoticed in this world, Aragon. Those who have the ears to hear and the eyes to see can interpret the signs easily enough. The birds sing of your coming, the beasts of the earth heed your scent, and the very trees and grass remember your touch. The bond between rider and dragon is so powerful that those who are sensitive to the forces of nature can feel it. You'll have to teach that trick to me sometime. It is no trick, merely the art of paying attention to what is already around you. Why did you come to Eastcroft, though? It would have been safer to meet me outside the village. Circumstances forced me here, as I assume they did you. You did not come here willingly, no. No. He rolled his shoulders, weary from the day's traveling. Pushing back sleep, he waved a hand at her dress and said, have you finally abandoned your shirt and trousers? A small smile appeared on Arya's face. only for the duration of this trip. I've lived among the Varden for more years than I care to recall, yet I still forget how humans insist upon separating their women from their men. I never could bring myself to adopt your customs, even if I did not conduct myself entirely as an elf. Who was to say yea or nay to me? My mother. She was on the other side of Algesia. Arya seemed to catch herself then, as if she had said more than she intended. She continued, in any event, I had an unfortunate encounter with a pair of ox herders soon after I left the Varden, and I stole this dress directly afterward. It fits well. One of the advantages of being a spellcaster is that you never have to wait for a tailor. Aragon laughed for a moment. Then he asked, what now? Now we rest. Tomorrow, before the sun rises, we shall slip out of Eastcroft, and no one shall be the wiser. That night, Aragon lay in front of the door, while Arya took the bed. Their arrangement was not the result of deference or courtesy on Aragon's part, although he would have insisted on giving Arya the bed in any event, but rather caution. If anyone were to barge into the room, it would seem odd to find a woman on the floor. As the empty hours crept by, Aragon stared at the beams above his head and traced the cracks in the wood, unable to calm his racing thoughts. He tried every method he knew to relax, but his mind kept returning to Arya, to his surprise at meeting her, to her comments about his treatment of Sloane, and, above all else, to the feelings he had for her. What those were exactly, he was unsure. He longed to be with her, but she had rejected his advances, and that tarnished his affection with hurt and anger, and also frustration, for while Aragon refused to accept that his suit was hopeless, he could not think of how to proceed. An ache formed in his chest as he listened to the gentle rise and fall of Arya's breathing. It tormented him to be so close and yet be unable to approach her. He twisted the edge of his tunic between his fingers and wished there was something he could do instead of resigning himself to an unwelcome fate. He wrestled with his unruly emotions deep into the night, until finally he succumbed to exhaustion and drifted into the waiting embrace of his waking dreams. There he wandered for a few fitful hours until the stars began to fade and it was time for him and Arya to leave Eastcroft. Together, they opened the window and jumped from the sill to the ground 12 feet below, a small drop for one with an elf's abilities. As she fell, Arya grasped the skirt of her dress to keep it from billowing around her. They landed inches apart and then set off running between the houses toward the palisade. People will wonder where we went, said Aragon between strides. Maybe we should have waited and left like normal travelers. It's riskier to stay. I paid for my room. That's all the innkeeper really cares about, not whether we snuck out early. The two of them parted for a few seconds as they circumvented a decrepit wagon, and then Arya added, the most important thing is to keep moving. If we linger, the king will surely find us. When they arrived at the outer wall, Arya ranged along it until she found a post that protruded somewhat. She wrapped her hands around it and pulled, testing the wood with her weight. The post swayed and rattled against its neighbors, but otherwise held. You first, said Arya. Please, after you. With a sigh of impatience, she tapped her bodice. A dress is somewhat breezier than a pair of leggings, Aragon. Heat flooded his cheeks as he caught her meaning. Reaching above his head, he got a good grip and then began to climb the palisade, bracing himself with his knees and feet during the ascent. At the top, he stopped and balanced on the tips of the sharpened posts. Go on, whispered Arya. Not until you join me. Don't be so. Watchman, said Aragon, and pointed. A lantern floated in the darkness between a pair of nearby houses. As the light approached, the gilded outline of a man emerged from the gloom. He carried a naked sword in one hand. Silent as a specter, Arya grasped the post and, using only the strength of her arms, pulled herself hand over hand toward Aragon. She seemed to glide upward, as if by magic. When she was close enough, Aragon seized her right forearm and lifted her above the remainder of the posts, setting her down next to him. Like two strange birds, they perched on the palisade, motionless and breathless as the watchman walked underneath them. He swung the lantern in either direction, searching for intruders. Don't look at the ground, pleaded Aragon. And don't look up. A moment later, the watchman sheathed his sword and continued on his rounds, humming to himself. Without a word, Aragon and Arya dropped to the other side of the palisade. The armor in Aragon's pack rattled as he struck the grass-covered bank below and rolled to dissipate the force of the impact. Springing to his feet, he bent low and dashed away from Eastcroft over the gray landscape, Arya close behind. They kept to hollows and dry streambeds as they skirted the farms that surrounded the village. A half dozen times, indignant dogs ran out to protest the invasion of their territories. Aragon tried to calm them with his mind, but the only way he found to stop the dogs from barking was to assure them that their terrible teeth and claws had scared him and Arya away. Pleased with their success, the dogs pranced with wagging tails back to the barns, sheds, and porches where they had been standing guard over their fiefdoms. Their smug confidence amused Aragon. 5 miles from Eastcroft, when it became apparent they were utterly alone and no one was trailing them, Aragon and Arya drew to a halt by a charred stump. Kneeling, Arya scooped several handfuls of dirt from the ground in front of her. Adurna Riza, she said. With a faint trickle, water welled out of the surrounding soil and poured into the hole she had dug. Arya waited until the water filled the cavity and then said, "Letta," and the flow ceased. She intoned a spell of scrying, and Nasuda's face appeared upon the surface of the still water. Arya greeted her, "My lady," Aragon said, and bowed. "Aragon," she replied. She appeared tired, hollow-cheeked, as if she had suffered a long illness. A lock snapped free of her bun and coiled itself into a tight knot at her hairline. Aragon glimpsed a row of bulky bandages on her arm as she slid a hand over her head, pressing the rebellious hair flat. "You are safe, thank Gokakara. We were so worried. I'm sorry I upset you, but I had my reasons. You must explain them to me when you arrive." "As you wish," he said. "How were you hurt? Did someone attack you? Why haven't any of your Rangirgata healed you?" "I ordered them to leave me alone. And that I will explain when you arrive." Thoroughly puzzled, Aragon nodded and swallowed his question. To Arya, Nasuda said, "I'm impressed, you found him. I wasn't sure you could." "Fortune smiled upon me. Perhaps, but I tend to believe your skill was as important as Fortune's generosity." "How long until you rejoin us?" 2-3 days, unless we encounter unforeseen difficulties." "Good, I will expect you then. From now on, I want you to contact me at least once before noon and once before nightfall. If I fail to hear from you, I'll assume you've been captured, and I'll send Saphira with a rescue force. We may not always have the privacy we need to work magic. Find a way to get it. I need to know where you two are and whether you're safe." Arya considered for a moment and then said, "If I can, I will do as you ask, but not if it puts Aragon in danger." "Agreed." Taking advantage of the ensuing pause in the conversation, Aragon said, "Nasuda, is Saphira near at hand? I would like to talk to her. We haven't spoken since Helgrind. She left an hour ago to scout our perimeter. Can you maintain this spell while I find out if she has returned?" "Go," said Arya. A single step carried Nasuda out of their field of view, leaving behind a static image of the table and chairs inside her red pavilion. For a good while, Aragon appraised the contents of the tent, but then restlessness overtook him and he allowed his eyes to drift from the pool of water to the back of Arya's neck. Her thick black hair fell to one side, exposing a strip of smooth skin just above the collar of her dress. That transfixed him for the better part of a minute, and then he stirred and leaned against the charred stump. There came the sound of breaking wood, and then a field of sparkling blue scales covered the pool as Saphira forced herself into the pavilion. It was hard for Aragon to tell what part of her he saw, it was such a small part. The scales slid past the pool and he glimpsed the underside of a thigh, a spike on her tail, the baggy membrane of a folded wing, and then the gleaming tip of a tooth as she turned and twisted, trying to find a position from which she could comfortably view the mirror Nasuda used for arcane communications. From the alarming noises that originated behind Saphira, Aragon guessed she was crushing most of the furniture. At last she settled in place, brought her head close to the mirror, so that one large sapphire eye occupied the entire pool, and peered out at Aragon. They looked at each other for a full minute, neither of them moving. It surprised Aragon how relieved he was to see her. He had not truly felt safe since he and she had separated. "I missed you," he whispered. She blinked once. "Nasuda, are you still there?" The muffled answer floated toward him from somewhere to the right of Saphira, "Yes, barely." "Would you be so kind as to relay Saphira's comments to me?" "I'm more than happy to, but at the moment, I'm caught between a wing and a pole, and there's no path free, so far as I can tell. You may have difficulty hearing me. If you're willing to bear with me, though, I'll give it a try." "Please do." Nasuda was quiet for several heartbeats, and then in a tone so like Saphira's that Aragon almost laughed, she said, "You are well." "I'm healthy as an ox. And you?" To compare myself with a bovine would be both ridiculous and insulting, but I'm as fit as ever, if that is what you are asking. I'm pleased Arya is with you. It's good for you to have someone sensible around to watch your back. I agree. Help is always welcome when you're in danger. While Aragon was grateful that he and Saphira were able to talk, albeit in a roundabout fashion, he found the spoken word a poor substitute for the free exchange of thoughts and emotions they enjoyed when in close proximity. Furthermore, with Arya and Nasuda privy to their conversation, Aragon was reluctant to address topics of a more personal nature, such as whether Saphira had forgiven him for forcing her to leave him in Helgrind. Saphira must have shared in his reluctance, for she too refrained from broaching the subject. They chatted about other, inconsequential happenings and then bade each other farewell. Before he stepped away from the pool, Aragon touched his fingers to his lips and silently mouthed, "I'm sorry." A sliver of space appeared around each of the small scales that rimmed Saphira's eye as the underlying flesh softened. She blinked long and slow, and he knew she understood his message and that she bore him no ill will. After Aragon and Arya took their leave of Nasuda, Arya terminated her spell and stood. With the back of her hand, she knocked the dirt from her dress. While she did, Aragon fidgeted, impatient as he had not been before. Right then he wanted nothing else but to run straight to Saphira and curl up with her in front of a campfire. "Let us be off," he said, already moving. "A delicate matter." The muscles of Roran's back popped and rippled as he heaved the boulder off the ground. He rested the large rock on his thighs for an instant and then, grunting, pressed it overhead and locked his arms straight. For a full minute, he held the crushing weight in the air. When his shoulders were trembling and about to fail, he threw the boulder onto the ground in front of him. It landed with a dull thud, leaving an indentation several inches deep in the dirt. On either side of Roran, 20 of the Varden's warriors struggled to lift boulders of similar size. Only 2 succeeded, the rest returned to the lighter rocks they were accustomed to. It pleased Roran that the months he had spent in Horst's Forge and the years of farm work before had given him the strength to hold his own with men who had drilled with their weapons every day since they turned 12. Roran shook the fire from his arms and took several deep breaths, the air cool against his bare chest. Reaching up, he massaged his right shoulder, cupping the round ball of muscle and exploring it with his fingers, confirming once again that no trace remained of the injury he had suffered when the Rizak had bitten him. He grinned, glad to be whole and sound again, being as it had seemed no likelier to him than a cow dancing a jig. A yelp of pain caused him to look over at Albrecht and Baldur, who were sparring with Lang, a swarthy, battle-scarred veteran who taught the arts of war. Even 2 against 1, Lang held his own, and with his wooden practice sword, he had disarmed Baldur, knocked him across the ribs, and jabbed Albrecht so hard in the leg, he fell sprawling, all in the span of a few seconds. Roran empathized with them. He had just finished his own session with Lang, and it had left him with several new bruises to go with his faded ones from Helgrind. For the most part, he preferred his hammer over a sword, but he thought he should still be able to handle a blade if the occasion called for it. Swords required more finesse than he felt most fights deserved. Bash a swordsman on the wrist and, armored or not, he would be too preoccupied with his broken bones to defend himself. After the Battle of the Burning Plains, Nasuda had invited the villagers from Carvajal to join the Varden. They had all accepted her offer. Those who would have refused had already elected to stay in Serta when the villagers stopped in Douth on their way to the Burning Plains. Every able-bodied man from Carvajal had taken up proper arms, discarding their makeshift spears and shields, and had worked to become warriors equal to any in Algesia. The people of Palantir Valley were accustomed to a hard life. Swinging a sword was no worse than chopping wood, and it was a far sight easier than breaking sod or hoeing acres of beets in the heat of summer. Those who knew a useful trade continued to ply their craft in service to the Varden, but in their spare time they still strove to master the weapons given to them, for every man was expected to fight when the call to battle sounded. Roran had devoted himself to the training with unwavering dedication since returning from Helgrind. Helping the Varden defeat the Empire and, ultimately, Galbatorix was the one thing he could do to protect the villagers and Katrina. He was not arrogant enough to believe that he alone could tip the balance of the war, but he was confident in his ability to shape the world and knew that if he applied himself, he could increase the Varden's chances of victory. He had to stay alive, though, and that meant conditioning his body and mastering the tools and techniques of slaughter so as to avoid falling to a more experienced warrior. As he crossed the practice field, on his way back to the tent he shared with Baldur, Roran passed a strip of grass 60 feet long whereon lay a 20-foot log stripped of its bark and polished smooth by the thousands of hands that rubbed against it every day. Without breaking his stride, Roran turned, slipped his fingers under the thick end of the log, lifted it, and, grunting from the strain, walked it upright. He gave the log a push then, and it toppled over. Grabbing the thin end, he repeated the process twice more. Unable to muster the energy to flip the log again, Roran left the field and trotted through the surrounding maze of gray canvas tents, waving to Loring and Fisk and others he recognized, as well as a half-dozen or so strangers who greeted him. "Hail, Stronghammer," they cried in warm tones. "Hail," he replied. "It is a strange thing," he thought, "to be known to people whom you have not met before." A minute later, he arrived at the tent that had become his home and, ducking inside, stored away the bow, the quiver of arrows, and the short sword the Varden had given him. He snared his waterskin from beside his bedding, then hurried back into the bright sunlight and, unstoppering the skin, poured the contents over his back and shoulders. Baths tended to be sporadic and infrequent events for Roran, but today was an important day, and he wanted to be fresh and clean for what was to come. With the sharp edge of a polished stick, he scraped the grime off his arms and legs and out from under his fingernails and then combed his hair and trimmed his beard. Satisfied that he was presentable, he pulled on his freshly washed tunic, stuck his hammer through his belt, and was about to head off through the camp when he became aware of Birgit watching him from behind the corner of the tent. She clenched a sheathed dagger with both hands. Roran froze, ready to draw his hammer at the slightest provocation. He knew that he was in mortal danger, and despite his prowess, he was not confident of defeating Birgit if she attacked, for like him, she pursued her enemies with single-minded determination. "You once asked me to help you," said Birgit, "and I agreed because I wanted to find the Rizak and kill them for eating my husband. Have I not upheld my bargain?" "You have. And do you remember I promised that once the Rizak were dead, I would have my compensation from you for your role in Quimby's death?" "I do." Birgit twisted the dagger with increasing urgency, the back of her fists ridged with tendons. The dagger rose out of its sheath a full inch, bearing the bright steel, and then slowly sank into darkness again. "Good," she said. "I would not want your memory to fail you. I will have my compensation, Harrowson. Never you doubt that." With a swift, firm step, she departed, the dagger hidden among the folds of her dress. Releasing his breath, Roran sat on a nearby stool and rubbed his throat, convinced that he had narrowly escaped being gutted by Birgit. Her visit had alarmed him, but it did not surprise him. He had been aware of her intentions for months, since before they left Carbajal, and he knew that one day he would have to settle his debt with her. A raven soared overhead, and as he tracked it, his mood lightened and he smiled. "Well," he said to himself, "a man rarely knows the day and hour when he will die. I could be killed at any moment, and there's not a blasted thing I can do about it. What will happen, and I won't waste the time I have above ground worrying. Misfortune always comes to those who wait. The trick is to find happiness in the brief gaps between disasters. Birgit will do what her conscience tells her to, and I will deal with it when I must." By his left foot, he noticed a yellowish stone, which he picked up and rolled between his fingers. Concentrating on it as hard as he could, he said, "Stenor Riza." The stone ignored his command and remained immobile between his thumb and forefinger. With a snort, he tossed it away. Standing, he strode north between the rows of tents. While he walked, he tried to untangle a knot in the lacing at his collar, but it resisted his efforts, and he gave up on it when he arrived at Horst's tent, which was twice as large as most. "Hello in there," he said, and knocked on the pole between the two entrance flaps. Katrina burst out of the tent, copper hair flying, and wrapped her arms around him. Laughing, he lifted her by the waist and spun her in a circle, all the world a blur except her face, then gently set her down. She pecked him on the lips, once, twice, 3 times. Growing still, he gazed into her eyes, more happy than he could ever remember being. "You smell nice," she said. "How are you?" The only flaw in his joy was seeing how thin and pale imprisonment had left her. It made him want to resurrect the Rizak so they could endure the same suffering they had inflicted upon her and his father. "Every day you ask me, and every day I tell you, better. Be patient, I will recover, but it will take time. The best remedy for what ails me is being with you here under the sun. It does me more good than I can tell you. That was not all I was asking." Crimson spots appeared on Katrina's cheeks, and she tilted her head back, her lips curving in a mischievous smile. "My, you are bold, dear sir. Most bold indeed. I'm not sure I should be alone with you, for fear you might take liberties with me." The spirit of her reply set his concern to rest. "Liberties, Well, since you already consider me a scoundrel, I might as well enjoy some of these liberties." And he kissed her until she broke the contact, although she remained in his embrace. "Oh," she said, out of breath. "You're a hard man to argue with, Roran Stronghammer." "That I am." Nodding toward the tent behind her, he lowered his voice and asked, "Does Elaine know?" She would if she weren't so preoccupied with her pregnancy. I think the stress of the trip from Carbajal may cause her to lose the child. She's sick a good part of the day, and she has pains that, well, of an unfortunate nature. Gertrude has been tending her, but she can't do much to ease her discomfort. All the same, the sooner Aragon returns, the better. I'm not sure how long I can keep this secret. You'll do fine, I'm sure. He released her then and tugged on the hem of his tunic to smooth out the wrinkles. How do I look? Katrina studied him with a critical eye and then wet the tips of her fingers and ran them through his hair, pushing it back off his forehead. Spotting the knot at his collar, she began to pick at it, saying, "You ought to pay closer attention to your clothes. Clothes haven't been trying to kill me. Well, things are different now. You're the cousin of a dragon rider, and you should look the part. People expect it of you." He allowed her to continue fussing with him until she was pleased with his appearance. Kissing her goodbye, he walked the half-mile to the center of the Varden's massive camp, where Nasuda's red command pavilion stood. The pennant mounted on the top bore a black shield and two parallel swords slanting underneath, and it whipped and snapped in a warm wind from the east. The 6 guards outside the pavilion, 2 humans, 2 dwarves, and 2 Urgles, lowered their weapons as Roran approached, and one of the Urgles, a thick-set brute with yellow teeth, challenged him, saying, "Who goes there?" His accent was nearly unintelligible. "Roran Stronghammer, son of Garrow. Nasuda sent for me." Pounding his breastplate with one fist, which produced a loud crash, the Urgle announced, "Roran Stronghammer requests an audience with you, Lady Nightstalker." "You may admit him," came the answer from inside. The warriors lifted their blades, and Roran carefully made his way past. They watched him, and he them, with the detached air of men who might have to fight each other at a moment's notice. Inside the pavilion, Roran was alarmed to see that most of the furniture was broken and overturned. The only pieces that seemed unharmed were a mirror mounted on a pole and the grand chair in which Nasuda was sitting. Ignoring their surroundings, he knelt and bowed to her. Nasuda's features and bearing were so different from those of the women Roran had grown up with, he was not sure how to act. She appeared strange and imperious, with her embroidered dress and the gold chains in her hair and her dusky skin, which at the moment had a reddish cast, due to the color of the fabric walls. In stark contrast to the rest of her apparel, linen bandages encased her forearms, a testament to her astounding courage during the trial of the long knives. Her feet had been a topic of constant discussion among the Varden ever since Roran had returned with Katrina. It was the one aspect of her he felt as if he understood, for he too would make any sacrifice in order to protect those he cared about. It just so happened that she cared about a group of thousands, while he was committed to his family and his village. "Please, rise," said Nasuda. He did as he was instructed and rested a hand on the head of his hammer, then waited while she inspected him. "My position rarely allows me the luxury of clear, direct speech, Roran, but I will be blunt with you today. You seem to be a man who appreciates candor, and we have much to discuss in a small amount of time." "Thank you, my lady. I have never enjoyed playing word games." "Excellent. To be blunt, then, you have presented me with 2 difficulties, neither of which I can easily resolve." He frowned. "What sort of difficulties?" "One of character, and one of politics. Your deeds in Palantir Valley and during your flight thence with your fellow villagers are nigh on incredible. They tell me that you have a daring mind and that you are skilled at combat, strategy, and inspiring people to follow you with unquestioning loyalty. They may have followed me, but they certainly never stopped questioning me." A smile touched her lips. "Perhaps. But you still got them here, didn't you? You possess valuable talents, Roran, and the Varden could use you. I assume you wish to be of service." "I do. As you know, Galbatorix has divided his army and sent troops south to reinforce the city of Arose, west toward Finster, and north toward Bellatona. He hopes to drag out this fight, to bleed us dry through slow attrition. Jormungandr and I cannot be in a dozen locations at once. We need captains whom we can trust to deal with the myriad conflicts springing up around us. In this, you could prove your worth to us. But," her voice faded, "but you do not yet know if you can rely upon me." "Indeed. Protecting one's friends and family stiffens a person's spine, but I wonder how you will fare without them. Will your nerve hold? And while you can lead, can you also obey orders? I cast no aspersions on your character, Roran, but the fate of Algesia is at stake, and I cannot risk putting someone incompetent in charge of my men. This war does not forgive such errors. Nor would it be fair to the men already with the Varden to place you over them without just cause. You must earn your responsibilities with us." "I understand. What would you have me do, then? Ah, but it's not that easy, for you and Aragon are practically brothers, and that complicates things immeasurably. As I'm sure you are aware, Aragon is the keystone of our hopes. It is important, then, to shelter him from distractions so he may concentrate upon the task before him. If I send you into battle and you die as a result, grief and anger might very well unbalance him. I've seen it happen before. Moreover, I must take great care with whom I allow you to serve, for there are those who will seek to influence you because of your relation to Aragon. So now you have a fair idea of the scope of my concerns. What have you to say about them? If the land itself is at stake and this war is as hotly contested as you imply, then I say you cannot afford to let me sit idle. Employing me as a common swordsman would be just as much a waste. But I think you know that already. As for politics, he shrugged. I don't care one with whom you put me with. No one shall get to Aragon through me. My only concern is breaking the empire so that my kith and kin can return to our home and live in peace. You are determined. Very. Could you not allow me to remain in charge of the men from Carvajal? We are as close as family, and we work well together. Test me that way. The Varden would not suffer, then, if I failed. She shook her head. No, perhaps in the future, but not yet. They require proper instruction, and I cannot judge your performance when you are surrounded by a group of people who are so loyal that at your urging they abandoned their homes and traversed the width of Algesia. She considers me a threat, he realized. My ability to influence the villagers makes her wary of me. In an attempt to disarm her, he said, they had their own sense to guide them. They knew it was folly to stay in the valley. You cannot explain away their behavior, Roran. What do you want of me, lady? Will you let me serve or not? And if so, how? Here is my offer. This morning, my magicians detected a patrol of 23 of Galbatorix's soldiers due east. I am sending out a contingent under the command of Martland Redbeard, the Earl of Toon, to destroy them and to do some scouting besides. If you are agreeable, you will serve under Martland. You will listen to and obey him and hopefully learn from him. He, in turn, will watch you and report to me whether he believes you are suitable for advancement. Martland is very experienced, and I have every confidence in his opinion. Does this strike you as fair, Roran Stronghammer? It does. Only, when would I leave, and how long would I be gone? You would leave today and return within a fortnight. Then I must ask, could you wait and send me on a different expedition, in a few days? I would like to be here when Aragon returns. Your concern for your cousin is admirable, but events move apace, and we cannot delay. As soon as I know Aragon's fate, I will have one of Dubranger Gata contact you with the tidings, whether they be good or ill. Roran rubbed his thumb along the sharp edges of his hammer as he tried to compose a reply that would convince Nasuda to change her mind and yet would not betray the secret he held. At last he abandoned the task as impossible and resigned himself to revealing the truth. You're right. I am worried about Aragon, but of all people he can fend for himself. Seeing him safe and sound isn't why I want to stay. Why, then? Because Katrina and I wish to be married, and we would like Aragon to perform the ceremony. There was a cascade of sharp clicks as Nasuda tapped her fingernails against the arms of her chair. If you believe I will allow you to loll about when you could be helping the Varden, just so you and Katrina can enjoy your wedding night a few days earlier, then you are sorely mistaken. It is a matter of some urgency, Lady Nightstalker. Nasuda's fingers paused in midair, and her eyes narrowed. How urgent? The sooner we are wed, the better it will be for Katrina's honor. If you understand me at all, know that I would never ask favors for myself. Light shifted on Nasuda's skin as she tilted her head. I see. Why Aragon? Why do you want him to perform the ceremony? Why not someone else? An elder from your village perhaps? Because he is my cousin and I care for him, and because he is a rider. Katrina lost nearly everything on my account. Her home, her father, and her dowry. I cannot replace those things, but I at least want to give her a wedding worth remembering. Without gold or livestock, I cannot pay for a lavish ceremony, so I must find some other means besides wealth to make our wedding memorable, and it seems to me nothing could be more grand than having a dragon rider marry us. Nasuda held her peace for so long, Roran began to wonder if she expected him to leave. Then, it would indeed be an honor to have a dragon rider marry you, but it would be a sorry day if Katrina had to accept your hand without a proper dowry. The dwarves furnished me with many presents of gold and jewelry when I lived in Trondheim. Some I have already sold to fund the Varden, but what I have left would still keep a woman clothed in mink and satin for many years to come. They shall be Katrina's, if you are amenable. Startled, Roran bowed again. Thank you. Your generosity is overwhelming. I don't know how I can ever repay you. Repay me by fighting for the Varden as you fought for Carbajal. I will, I swear it. Galbatorix will curse the day he ever sent the Rizak after me. I'm sure he already does. Now go. You may remain in camp until Aragon returns and marries you to Katrina, but then I expect you to be in the saddle the following morning. BLOODWOLF. What a proud man, thought Nasuda as she watched Roran leave the pavilion. It's interesting, he and Aragon are alike in so many ways, and yet their personalities are fundamentally different. Aragon may be one of the most deadly warriors in Algesia, but he isn't a hard or cruel person. Roran, however, is made of sterner stuff. I hope that he never crosses me. I would have to destroy him in order to stop him. She checked her bandages and, satisfied that they were still fresh, rang for Farika and ordered her to bring a meal. After her handmaid delivered the food and then retired from the tent, Nasuda signaled Elba, who emerged from her hiding place behind the false panel at the rear of the pavilion. Together, the two of them shared a mid-morning repast. Nasuda spent the next few hours reviewing the Varden's latest inventory reports, calculating the number of wagon trains she would need to move the Varden farther north, and adding and subtracting rows of figures that represented the finances of her army. She sent messages to the dwarves and Urgles, ordered the bladesmiths to increase their production of spearheads, threatened the Council of Elders with dissolution, as she did most every week, and otherwise attended to the Varden's business. Then, with Elba at her side, Nasuda rode out on her stallion, Battle Storm, and met with Triana, who had captured and was busy interrogating a member of Galbatorix's spy network, the Black Hand. As she and Elba left Triana's tent, Nasuda became aware of a commotion to the north. She heard shouts and cheers, then a man appeared from among the tent, sprinting toward her. Without a word, her guards formed a tight circle around her, save for one of the Urgles, who planted himself in the path of the runner and hefted his club. The man slowed to a stop before the Urgle and, gasping, shouted, "Lady Nasuda. The elves are here. The elves have arrived." For a wild, improbable moment, Nasuda thought he meant Queen Islandzadi and her army, but then she remembered Islandzadi was near Sunan. Not even the elves could move a host across the width of Algesia in less than a week. It must be the 12 spellweavers Islandzadi sent to protect Aragon. "Quick, my horse," she said, and snapped her fingers. Her forearms burned as she swung herself onto Battle Storm. She waited only long enough for the nearest Urgle to hand her Elba, then drove her heels into the stallion. His muscles surged beneath her as he sprang into a gallop. Bending low over his neck, she steered him down a crude lane between two rows of tents, dodging men and animals and jumping a rain barrel that barred her way. The men did not seem to take offense. They laughed and scrambled after her so they could see the elves with their own eyes. When she arrived at the northern entrance to the camp, she and Elba dismounted and scanned the horizon for motion. "There," said Elba, and pointed. Nearly 2 miles away, 12 long, lean figures emerged from behind a stand of juniper trees, their outlines wavering in the morning heat. The elves ran in unison, so light and fast, their feet raised no dust and they appeared to fly over the countryside. Nasuda's scalp prickled. Their speed was both beautiful and unnatural. They reminded her of a pack of predators chasing their prey. She felt the same sense of danger as when she had seen a SHRRG, a giant wolf, in the Bior Mountains. Awe-inspiring, aren't they? Nasuda started to find Angela next to her. She was annoyed and mystified by how the herbalist had been able to sneak up on her. She wished Elba had warned her of Angela's approach. "How is it you always manage to be present when something interesting is about to occur?" "Oh well, I like to know what's going on, and being there is so much faster than waiting for someone to tell me about it afterward. Besides, people always leave out important pieces of information, like whether someone's ring finger is longer than their index finger, or whether they have magical shields protecting them, or whether the donkey they are riding happens to have a bald patch in the shape of a rooster's head. Don't you agree?" Nasuda frowned. "You never reveal your secrets, do you? Now, what good would that do? Everyone would get all excited over some piffle of a spell, and then I'd have to spend hours trying to explain, and in the end, King Orin would want to chop off my head and I would have to fight off half your spellcasters during my escape. It's just not worth the effort, if you ask me." Your answer hardly inspires confidence. "But that's because you are too serious, Lady Nightstalker." "But tell me," Nasuda persisted, "why would you want to know if someone is riding a donkey with a bald patch shaped like a rooster's head?" Ah, that. Well, the man who owns that particular donkey cheated me at a game of knucklebones out of 3 buttons and a rather interesting shard of enchanted crystal. Cheated you? Angela pursed her lips, obviously irked. The knucklebones were loaded. I switched them on him, but then he replaced them with a set of his own when I was distracted. I'm still not quite sure how he tricked me. So you were both cheating. It was a valuable crystal. Besides, how can you cheat a cheater? Before Nasuda could respond, the 6 Nighthawks came pounding out of the camp and took up positions around her. She hid her distaste as the heat and smell of their bodies assailed her. The odor of the 2 Urgles was especially pungent. Then, somewhat to her surprise, the captain of the ship, a burly man with a crooked nose and the name of Garvin, accosted her. My lady, may I have a word with you in private? He spoke through close-set teeth, as if struggling to contain a great emotion. Angela and Elba looked at Nasuda for confirmation that she wanted them to withdraw. She nodded, and they began walking west, toward the Giant River. Once Nasuda was confident they were out of hearing, she began to speak, but Garvin overrode her, exclaiming, Blast it, Lady Nasuda, you shouldn't have left us as you did. Peace, Captain, she replied. It was a small enough risk, and I felt it was important to be here in time to greet the elves. Garvin's mail rustled as he struck his leg with a bunched fist. A small risk. Not an hour ago, you received proof that Galbatorix still has agents hidden among us. He has been able to infiltrate us again and again, and yet you see fit to abandon your escort and go racing through a host of potential assassins. Have you forgotten the attack in Aberon, or how the twins slew your father? Captain Garvin, you go too far. I'll go even further if it means ensuring your well-being. The elves, Nasuda observed, had half the distance between them and the camp. Angry, and eager to end the conversation, she said, I am not without my own protection, Captain. Flicking his eyes toward Elba, Garvin said, We have suspected as much, lady. A pause followed, as if he were hoping she would volunteer more information. When she remained silent, he forged onward. If you were actually safe, then I was wrong to accuse you of recklessness, and I apologize. Still, safety and the appearance of safety are 2 different things. For the Nighthawks to be effective, we have to be the smartest, toughest, meanest warriors in the land, and people have to believe that we're the smartest, the toughest, and the meanest. They have to believe that if they try to stab you or shoot you with a crossbow or use magic against you, that we will stop them. If they believe they have about as much chance of killing you as a mouse does a dragon, then they may very well give up the idea as hopeless, and we will have averted an attack without ever having to lift a finger. We cannot fight all your enemies, Lady Nasuda. That would take an army. Even Aragon couldn't save you if all who want you dead had the courage to act upon their hatred. You might survive 100 attempts on your life or 1,000, but eventually one would succeed. The only way to keep that from happening is to convince the majority of your enemies that they will never get past the Nighthawks. Our reputation can protect you just as surely as our swords and our armor. It does us no good, then, for people to see you riding off without us. No doubt we looked a right bunch of fools back there, frantically trying to catch up. After all, if you do not respect us, lady, why should anyone else? Garvin moved closer, dropping his voice. We will gladly die for you if we must. All we ask in return is that you allow us to perform our duties. It is a small favor, considering. And the day may come when you are grateful we are here. Your other protection is human, and therefore fallible, whatever her arcane powers may be. She has not sworn the same oaths in the ancient language that we of the Nighthawks have. Her sympathies could shift, and you would do well to ponder your fate if she turned against you. The Nighthawks, however, will never betray you. We are yours, Lady Nasuda, fully and completely. So please, let the Nighthawks do what they are supposed to do. Let us protect you. Initially, Nasuda was indifferent to his arguments, but his eloquence and the clarity of his reasoning impressed her. He was, she thought, a man she might have used for elsewhere. I see Jormungandr has surrounded me with warriors as skilled with their tongues as they are with their swords, she said with a smile. My lady. You were right. I should not have left you and your men behind, and I am sorry. It was careless and inconsiderate. I am still unaccustomed to having guards with me at all hours of the day, and sometimes I forget I cannot move about with the freedom I once did. You have my word of honor, Captain Garvin, it shall not happen again. I do not wish to cripple the Nighthawks any more than you. Thank you, my lady. Nasuda turned back toward the elves, but they were hidden from sight below the bank of a dry stream a quarter of a mile away. It strikes me, Garvin, that you may have invented a motto for the Nighthawks a moment ago. Did I? If so, I cannot recall. You did. The smartest, the toughest, and the meanest, you said. That would be a fine motto, although perhaps without the and. If the other Nighthawks approve of it, you should have Triana translate the phrase into the ancient language, and I will have it inscribed on your shields and embroidered on your standards. You are most generous, my lady. When we return to our tents, I shall discuss the matter with Jormungandr and my fellow captains. Only. He hesitated then, and guessing at what troubled him, Nasuda said, but you are worried that such a motto may be too vulgar for men of your position, and you would prefer something more noble and high-minded, am I right? Exactly, my lady, he said with a relieved expression. It's a valid concern, I suppose. The Nighthawks represent the Varden, and you must interact with notables of every race and rank in the course of your duty. It would be regrettable if you were to convey the wrong impression. Very well, I leave it to you and your compatriots to devise an appropriate motto. I am confident you will do an excellent job. At that moment, the 12 elves emerged from the dry stream, and Garvin, after murmuring additional thanks, moved a discreet distance from Nasuda. Composing herself for a state visit, Nasuda signaled Angela and Elba to return. When he was still several hundred feet away, the lead elf appeared soot black from head to toe. At first Nasuda assumed he was dark-skinned, like herself, and wearing dark attire, but as he drew closer, she saw that the elf wore only a loincloth and a braided fabric belt with a small pouch attached. The rest of him was covered with midnight blue fur that glistened with a healthy sheen under the glare of the sun. On average, the fur was a quarter-inch long, a smooth, flexible armor that mirrored the shape and movement of the underlying muscles, but on his ankles and the undersides of his forearms, it extended a full 2 inches, and between his shoulder blades, there was a ruffled mane that stuck out a hand's breadth from his body and tapered down along his back to the base of his spine. Jagged bangs shadowed his brow, and cat-like tufts sprouted from the tips of his pointed ears, but otherwise the fur on his face was so short and flat, only its color betrayed its presence. His eyes were bright yellow. Instead of fingernails, a claw protruded from each of his middle fingers. And as he slowed to a stop before her, Nasuda noticed that a certain odor surrounded him, a salty musk reminiscent of dried juniper wood, oiled leather, and smoke. It was such a strong smell, and so obviously masculine, Nasuda felt her skin go hot and cold and crawl with anticipation, and she blushed and was glad it would not show. The rest of the elves were more as she had expected, of the same general build and complexion as Arya, with short tunics of dusky orange and pine needle green. 6 were men, and 6 were women. They all had raven hair, save for 2 of the women whose hair was like starlight. It was impossible to determine their ages, for their faces were smooth and unlined. They were the first elves besides Arya that Nasuda had met in person, and she was eager to find out if Arya was representative of her race. Touching his first 2 fingers to his lips, the lead elf bowed, as did his companions, and then twisted his right hand against his chest and said, "Greetings and felicitations, Nasuda, daughter of a jihad. Adra Esterni on the Thelduin." His accent was more pronounced than Arya's, a lilting cadence that gave his words music. "Adra Dueverinya o Novarda," replied Nasuda, as Arya had taught her. The elf smiled, revealing teeth that were sharper than normal. "I am Blodgar, son of Ildrid the Beautiful." He introduced the other elves in turn before continuing. "We bring you glad tidings from Queen Islandzadi. Last night our spellcasters succeeded in destroying the gates of Sunan. Even as we speak, our forces advance through the streets toward the tower where Lord Terran has barricaded himself. Some few still resist us, but the city has fallen, and soon we shall have complete control over Sunan." Nasuda's guards and the Varden gathered behind her burst into cheers at the news. She too rejoiced at the victory, but then a sense of foreboding and disquiet tempered her celebratory mood as she pictured elves, especially ones as strong as Blodgarm, invading human homes. "What unearthly forces have I unleashed?" she wondered. "These are glad tidings indeed," she said, "and I am well pleased to hear them. With Sunan captured, we are that much closer to Uruibane, and thus to Galbatorix and the fulfillment of our goals." In a more private voice, she said, "I trust that Queen Islandzadi will be gentle with the people of Sunan, with those who have no love for Galbatorix but lack the means or the courage to oppose the Empire. Queen Islandzadi is both kind and merciful to her subjects, even if they are her unwilling subjects, but if anyone dares oppose us, we shall sweep them aside like dead leaves before an autumn storm." "I would expect nothing less from a race as old and mighty as yours," Nasuda replied. After satisfying the demands of courtesy with several more polite exchanges of increasing triviality, Nasuda deemed it appropriate to address the reason for the elves' visit. She ordered the assembled crowd to disperse, then said, "Your purpose here, as I understand it, is to protect Aragon and Saphira. Am I right? You are, Nasuda Svitkona. And we are aware that Aragon is still inside the Empire but that he will return soon. Are you also aware that Arya left in search of him and that they are now traveling together?" Glodgarm flicked his ears. "We were informed of that as well. It is unfortunate that they should both be in such danger, but hopefully no harm will befall them. What do you intend to do, then? Will you seek them out and escort them back to the Varden? Or will you stay and wait and trust that Aragon and Arya can defend themselves against Galbatorix's minions?" "We will remain as your guests, Nasuda, daughter of a jihad. Aragon and Arya are safe enough as long as they avoid detection. Joining them in the Empire could very well attract unwanted attention. Under the circumstances, it seems best to bide our time where we can yet do some good. Galbatorix is most likely to strike here, at the Varden, and if he does, and if Thorn and Murtaugh should reappear, Saphira will need all our help to drive them off." Nasuda was surprised. "Aragon said you were among the strongest spellcasters of your race, but do you really have the wherewithal to thwart that accursed pair? Like Galbatorix, they have powers far beyond those of ordinary riders. With Saphira helping us, yes, we believe that we can match or overcome Thorn and Murtaugh. We know what the Forsworn were capable of, and while Galbatorix has probably made Thorn and Murtaugh stronger than any individual member of the Forsworn, he certainly won't have made them his equals. In that regard, at least, his fear of treachery is to our benefit. Even 3 of the Forsworn could not conquer the 12 of us in a dragon. Therefore, we are confident that we can hold our own against all but Galbatorix. That is heartening. Since Aragon's defeat at the hands of Murtaugh, I have been wondering if we should retreat and hide until Aragon's strength increases. Your assurances convince me that we are not entirely without hope. We may have no idea how to kill Galbatorix himself, but until we batter down the gates of his citadel in Uruivane, or until he chooses to fly out on Shrukin and confront us on the field of battle, nothing shall stop us." She paused. "You have given me no reason to distrust you, Glodgarm, but before you enter our camp, I must ask that you allow one of my men to touch each of your minds to confirm that you are actually elves, and not humans Galbatorix has sent here in disguise. It pains me to make such a request, but we have been plagued by spies and traitors, and we dare not take you, or anyone else, at their word. It is not my intention to cause offense, but war has taught us these precautions are necessary. Surely you, who have ringed the entire leafy expanse of Duweldenvarden with protective spells, can understand my reasons. So I ask, will you agree to this?" Glodgarm's eyes were feral and his teeth were alarmingly sharp as he said, "For the most part, the trees of Duweldenvarden have needles, not leaves. Test as if you must, but I warn you, whomever you assign the task should take great care he does not delve too deeply into our minds, else he may find himself stripped of his reason. It is perilous for mortals to wander among our thoughts. They can easily become lost and be unable to return to their bodies. Nor are our secrets available for general inspection." Nasuda understood. The elves would destroy anyone who ventured into forbidden territory. "Captain Garvin," she said. Stepping forward with the expression of a man approaching his doom, Garvin stood opposite Glodgarm, closed his eyes, and frowned intensely as he searched out Glodgarm's consciousness. Nasuda bit the inside of her lip as she watched. When she was a child, a one-legged man by the name of Hargrove had taught her how to conceal her thoughts from telepaths and how to block and divert the stabbing lances of a mental attack. At both those skills she excelled, and although she had never succeeded at initiating contact with the mind of another, she was thoroughly familiar with the principles involved. She empathized, then, with the difficulty and the delicacy of what Garvin was trying to do, a trial only made harder by the strange nature of the elves. Leaning toward her, Angela whispered, "You should have had me check the elves. It would have been safer." "Perhaps," said Nasuda. Despite all the help the herbalist had given her in the Varden, she still felt uncomfortable relying upon her for official business. For a few moments longer, Garvin continued his efforts, and then his eyes snapped open and he released his breath in an explosive burst. His neck and face were mottled from the strain, and his pupils were dilated, as if it were night. In contrast, Glodgarm appeared undisturbed. His fur was smooth, his breathing regular, and a faint smile of amusement flickered about the corners of his lips. "Well?" asked Nasuda. It seemed to take Garvin a longish while to hear her question, and then the burly captain with the crooked nose said, "He is not human, my lady. Of that I have no doubt. No doubt whatsoever. Pleased and disturbed, for there was something uncomfortably remote about his reply, Nasuda said, "Very well. Proceed." Thereafter, Garvin required less and less time to examine each elf, spending no more than a half dozen seconds on the very last of the group. Nasuda kept a close eye on him throughout the process, and she saw how his fingers became white and bloodless, and the skin at his temples sank into his skull like the eardrums of a frog, and he acquired the languid appearance of a person swimming deep underwater. Having completed his assignment, Garvin returned to his post beside Nasuda. He was, she thought, a changed man. His original determination and fierceness of spirit had faded into the dreamy air of a sleepwalker, and while he looked at her when she asked if he was well, and he answered in an even enough tone, she felt as if his spirit was far away, ambling among dusty, sunlit glades somewhere in the elves' mysterious forest. Nasuda hoped he would soon recover. If he did not, she would ask Aragon or Angela, or perhaps the two of them together, to attend to Garvin. Until such time as his condition improved, she decided that he should no longer serve as an active member of the Nighthawks. Jormungandr would give him something simple to do, so she would not suffer guilt at causing him any further injury, and he might at least have the pleasure of enjoying whatever visions his contact with the elves had left him with. Bitter at her loss, and furious with herself, with the elves, and with Galbatorix and the Empire for making such a sacrifice necessary, she had difficulty maintaining a soft tongue and good manners. When you spoke of peril, Blodgarm, you would have done well to mention that even those who return to their bodies do not escape entirely unscathed. My lady, I am fine, said Garvin. His protestation was so weak and ineffectual, hardly anyone noticed, and it only served to strengthen Nasuda's sense of outrage. The fur on Blodgarm's neck rippled and stiffened. If I failed to explain myself clearly enough before, then I apologize. However, do not blame us for what has happened. We cannot help our nature. And do not blame yourself either, for we live in an age of suspicion. To allow us to pass unchallenged would have been negligent on your part. It is regrettable that such an unpleasant incident should mar this historic meeting between us, but at least now you may rest easy, confident that you have established our origins and that we are what we seem to be, elves of Duweldenbarden. A fresh cloud of his musk drifted over Nasuda, and even though she was hard with anger, her joints weakened and she was assailed by thoughts of bowers draped in silk, goblets of cherry wine, and the mournful dwarf songs she had often heard echoing through the empty halls of Trondheim. Distracted, she said, I would Aragon or Arya were here, for they could have looked at your minds without fear of losing their sanity. Again she succumbed to the wanton attraction of Blodgarm's odor, imagining what it would feel like to run her hands through his mane. She only returned to herself when Elba pulled on her left arm, forcing her to bend over and place her ear close to the witch child's mouth. In a low, harsh voice, Elba said, Harhound. Concentrate upon the taste of Harhound. Following her advice, Nasuda summoned a memory from the previous year, when she had eaten Harhound candy during one of King Hrothgar's feasts. Just thinking about the acrid flavor of the candy dried out her mouth and counteracted the seductive qualities of Blodgarm's musk. She attempted to conceal her lapse in concentration by saying, My young companion here is wondering why you look so different from other elves. I must confess to some curiosity on the subject as well. Your appearance is not what we have come to expect from your race. Would you be so kind as to share with us the reason for your more animalistic features? A shiny ripple flowed through Blodgarm's fur as he shrugged. This shape pleased me, he said. Some write poems about the sun and the moon, others grow flowers or build great structures or compose music. As much as I appreciate those various art forms, I believe that true beauty only exists in the fang of a wolf, in the pelt of the forest cat, in the eye of an eagle. So I adopted those attributes for myself. In another 100 years, I may lose interest in the beasts of the land and instead decide that the beasts of the sea embody all that is good, and then I will cover myself with scales, transform my hands into fins and my feet into a tail, and I will vanish beneath the surface of the waves and never again be seen in Algesia. If he was jesting, as Nasuda believed, he showed no indication of it. Quite to the contrary, he was so serious, she wondered if he was mocking her. Most interesting, she said. I hope the urge to become a fish does not strike you in the near future, for we have need of you on dry ground. Of course, if Galbatorix should decide to also enslave the sharks and the rockfish, why, then, a spellcaster who can breathe underwater may be of some use. Without warning, the 12 elves filled the air with their clear, bright laughter, and birds for over a mile in every direction burst into song. The sound of their mirth was like water falling on crystal. Nasuda smiled without meaning to, and around her she saw similar expressions on the faces of her guards. Even the two Urgles seemed giddy with joy. And when the elves fell silent and the world became mundane again, Nasuda felt the sadness of a fading dream. A film of tears obscured her vision for a clutch of heartbeats, and then that too was gone. Smiling for the first time, and thereby presenting a visage both handsome and terrifying, Blodgarm said, "It will be an honor to serve alongside a woman as intelligent, capable, and witty as yourself, Lady Nasuda. One of these days, when your duties permit, I would be delighted to teach you our game of runes. You would make a formidable opponent, I'm sure." The elves' sudden shift in behavior reminded her of a word she had occasionally heard the dwarves use to describe them: capricious. It had seemed a harmless enough description when she was a girl. It reinforced her concept of the elves as creatures who flitted from one delight to another, like fairies in a garden of flowers, but she now recognized that what the dwarves really meant was beware. Beware, for you never know what an elf will do. She sighed to herself, depressed by the prospect of having to contend with another group of beings intent on controlling her for their own ends. Is life always this complicated? She wondered. Or do I bring it upon myself? From within the camp, she saw King Orin riding toward them at the head of a massive train of nobles, courtiers, functionaries major and minor, advisors, assistants, servants, men-at-arms, and a plethora of other species she did not bother identifying, while from the west, rapidly descending on outstretched wings, she saw Saphira. Girding herself for the loud tedium about to engulf them, she said, "It may be some months before I have the opportunity to accept your offer, Blodgarm, but I appreciate it nevertheless. I would enjoy the distraction of a game after the work of a long day. For the present, however, it must remain a deferred pleasure. The entire weight of human society is about to crash down upon you. I suggest you prepare yourselves for an avalanche of names, questions, and requests. We humans are a curious lot, and none of us have seen so many elves before." "We are prepared for this, Lady Nasuda," said Blodgarm. As King Orin's thundering cavalcade drew near and Saphira prepared to land, flattening the grass with the wind from her wings, Nasuda's last thought was, "Oh dear. I'll have to put a battalion around Blodgarm to keep him from being torn apart by the wind in the camp. And even that might not solve the problem." Mercy, Dragon Rider. It was mid-afternoon the day after they had left Isentroth when Aragon sensed the patrol of 15 soldiers ahead of them. He mentioned it to Arya, and she nodded. "I noticed them as well." Neither he nor she voiced any concerns, but worry began to gnaw at Aragon's belly, and he saw how Arya's eyebrows lowered into a fierce frown. The land around them was open and flat, devoid of any cover. They had encountered groups of soldiers before, but always in the company of other travelers. Now they were alone on the faint trail of a road. "We could dig a hole with magic, cover the top with brush, and hide in it until they leave," said Aragon. Arya shook her head without breaking stride. "What would we do with the excess dirt? They'd think they had discovered the biggest badger den in existence. Besides, I would rather save our energy for running." Aragon grunted. "I'm not sure how many more miles I have left in me." He was not winded, but the relentless pounding was wearing him down. His knees hurt, his ankles were sore, his left big toe was red and swollen, and blisters continued to break out on his heels, no matter how tightly he bound them. The previous night, he had healed several of the aches and pains troubling him, and while that had provided a measure of relief, the spells only exacerbated his exhaustion. The patrol was visible as a plume of dust for half an hour before Aragon was able to make out the shapes of the men and the horses at the base of the yellow cloud. Since he and Arya had keener eyesight than most humans, it was unlikely the horsemen could see them at that distance, so they continued to run for another 10 minutes. Then they stopped. Arya removed her skirt from her pack and tied it over the leggings she wore while running, and Aragon stored Brahm's ring in his own pack and smeared dirt over his right palm to hide his silvery Gedway Ignatia. They resumed their journey with bowed heads, hunched shoulders, and dragging feet. If all went well, the soldiers would assume they were just another pair of refugees. Although Aragon could feel the rumble of approaching hoofbeats and hear the cries of the men driving their steeds, it still took the better part of an hour for their two groups to meet on the vast plain. When they did, Aragon and Arya moved off the road and stood looking down between their feet. Aragon caught a glimpse of horse legs from under the edge of his brow as the first few riders pounded past, but then the choking dust billowed over him, obscuring the rest of the patrol. The dirt in the air was so thick, he had to close his eyes. Listening carefully, he counted until he was sure that more than half the patrol had gone by. "They're not going to bother questioning us," he thought. His elation was short-lived. A moment later, someone in the swirling blizzard of dust shouted, "Company, halt." A chorus of woes, steady there's, and hey there, Nels rang out as the 15 men coaxed their mounts to form a circle around Aragon and Arya. Before the soldiers completed their maneuver and the air cleared, Aragon pawed the ground for a large pebble, then stood back up. Be still, hissed Arya. While he waited for the soldiers to make their intentions known, Aragon strove to calm his racing heart by rehearsing the story he and Arya had concocted to explain their presence so close to the border with Serta. His efforts failed, for notwithstanding his strength, his training, the knowledge of the battles he had won, and the half-dozen wards protecting him, his flesh remained convinced that imminent injury or death awaited him. His gut twisted, his throat constricted, and his limbs were light and unsteady. Oh, get on with it, he thought. He longed to tear something apart with his hands, as if an act of destruction would relieve the pressure building inside of him, but the urge only heightened his frustration, for he dared not move. The one thing that steadied him was Arya's presence. He would sooner cut off a hand than have her consider him a coward. And although she was a mighty warrior in her own right, he still felt the desire to defend her. The voice that had ordered the patrol to halt again issued forth. Let me see your faces. Raising his head, Aragon saw a man sitting before them on a roan charger, his gloved hands folded over the pommel of his saddle. Upon his upper lip there sprouted an enormous curly mustache that, after descending to the corners of his mouth, extended a good 9 inches in either direction and was in stark contrast to the straight hair that fell to his shoulders. How such a massive piece of sculpted foliage supported its own weight puzzled Aragon, especially since it was dull and lusterless and obviously had not been impregnated with warm beeswax. The other soldiers held spears pointed at Aragon and Arya. So much dirt covered them, it was impossible to see the flames stitched on their tunics. Now then, said the man, and his mustache wobbled like an unbalanced set of scales. Who are you? Where are you going? And what is your business in the king's land? Then he waved a hand. No, don't bother answering. It doesn't matter. Nothing matters nowadays. The world is coming to an end, and we waste our days interrogating peasants. Bah, superstitious vermin who scurry from place to place, devouring all the food in the land and reproducing at a ghastly rate. At my family's estate near Uruivane, we would have the likes of you flogged if we caught you wandering around without permission, and if we learned that you had stolen from your master, why, then we'd hang you. Whatever you want to tell me is lies. It always is. Ellipsis. What have you got in that pack of yours, E.H.? Food and blankets, yes, but maybe a pair of gold candlesticks, E.H. Silverware from the locked chest. Secret letters for the Varden. E.H. Cat got your tongue. Well, we'll soon sort the matter out. Langward, why don't you see what treasures you can excavate from yonder knapsack? There's a good boy. Aragon staggered forward as one of the soldiers struck him across the back with the haft of a spear. He had wrapped his armor in rags to keep the pieces from rubbing against each other. The rags, however, were too thin to entirely absorb the force of the blow and muffle the clang of metal. Oh ho, exclaimed the man with the mustache. Grabbing Aragon from behind, the soldier unlaced the top of his pack and pulled out his halberd, saying, Look, sir. The man with the mustache broke out in a delighted grin. Armor. And of fine make as well. Very fine, I should say. Well, you are full of surprises. Going to join the Varden, were you? Intent on treason and sedition, MMH. His expression soured. Or are you one of those who generally give honest soldiers a bad name? If so, you are a most incompetent mercenary, you don't even have a weapon. Was it too much trouble to cut yourself a staff or a club, E.H.? Well, how about it? Answer me. No, sir. No, sir. Didn't occur to you, I suppose. It's a pity we have to accept such slow-minded wretches, but that's what this blasted war has reduced us to, scrounging for leftovers. Accept me where, sir? Silence, you insolent rascal. No one gave you permission to speak. His mustache quivering, the man gestured. Red lights exploded across Aragon's field of vision as the soldier behind him bashed him on the head. Whether you are a thief, a traitor, a mercenary, or merely a fool, your fate will be the same. Once you swear the oath of service, you will have no choice but to obey Galbatorix and those who speak for him. We are the first army in history to be free of dissent. No mindless blathering about what we should do. Only orders, clear and direct. You too shall join our cause, and you shall have the privilege of helping to make real the glorious future our great king has foreseen. As for your lovely companion, there are other ways she can be of use to the Empire, E.H. Now tie them up. Aragon knew then what he had to do. Glancing over, he found Arya already looking at him, her eyes hard and bright. He blinked once. She blinked in return. His hand tightened around the pebble. Most of the soldiers Aragon had fought on the burning plains had possessed certain rudimentary wards intended to shield them from magical attacks, and he suspected these men were likewise equipped. He was confident he could break or circumvent any spells Galbatorix's magicians invented, but it would require more time than he now had. Instead, he cocked his arm and, with a flick of his wrist, threw the pebble at the man with the mustache. The pebble punctured the side of his helm. Before the soldiers could react, Aragon twisted around, yanked the spear from the hands of the man who had been tormenting him, and used it to knock him off his horse. As the man landed, Aragon stabbed him through the heart, breaking the blade of the spear on the metal plates of the soldier's gambeson. Releasing the spear, Aragon dove backward, his body parallel with the ground as he passed underneath 7 spears that were flying toward where he had been. The lethal shafts seemed to float above him as he fell. The instant Aragon had released the pebble, Arya bounded up the side of the horse nearest her, jumping from stirrup to saddle, and kicked the head of the oblivious soldier who was perched on the mare. He went hurtling more than 30 feet. Then Arya leapt from the back of horse to horse, killing the soldiers with her knees, her feet, and her hands in an incredible display of grace and balance. Jagged rocks tore at Aragon's stomach as he tumbled to a stop. Grimacing, he sprang upright. 4 soldiers who had dismounted confronted him with drawn swords. They charged. Dodging to the right, he caught the first soldier's wrist as the man swung his sword and punched him in the armpit. The man collapsed and was still. Aragon dispatched his next opponents by twisting their heads until their spines snapped. The 4th soldier was so close by then, running at him with sword held high, Aragon could not evade him. Trapped, he did the one thing he could. He struck the man in the chest with all his might. A fountain of blood and sweat erupted as the fist connected. The blow staved in the man's ribs and propelled him more than a dozen feet over the grass, where he fetched up against another corpse. Aragon gasped and doubled over, cradling his throbbing hand. 4 of his knuckles were disjointed, and white cartilage showed through his mangled skin. Blast! He thought as hot blood poured from the wounds. His fingers refused to move when he ordered them to. He realized that his hand would be useless until he could heal it. Fearing another attack, he looked around for Arya and the rest of the soldiers. The horses had scattered. Only 3 soldiers remained alive. Arya was grappling with 2 of them some distance away while the 3rd and final soldier fled south along the road. Gathering his strength, Aragon pursued him. As he narrowed the gap between them, the man began to plead for mercy, promising he would tell no one about the massacre and holding out his hands to show they were empty. When Aragon was within arm's reach, the man veered to the side and then a few steps later changed direction again, darting back and forth across the countryside like a frightened jackrabbit. All the while, the man continued to beg, tears streaming down his cheeks, saying that he was too young to die, that he had yet to marry and father a child, that his parents would miss him, and that he had been pressed into the army and this was only his 5th mission and why couldn't Aragon leave him alone? What have you against me? He sobbed. I only did what I had to. I'm a good person. Aragon paused and forced himself to say, you can't keep up with us. We can't leave you. You'll catch a horse and betray us. No, I won't. People will ask what happened here. Your oath to Galbatorix and the Empire won't let you lie. I'm sorry, but I don't know how to release you from your bond, except... Why are you doing this? You're a monster, screamed the man. With an expression of pure terror, he made an attempt to dash around Aragon and return to the road. Aragon overtook him in less than 10 feet, and as the man was still crying and asking for clemency, Aragon wrapped his left hand around his neck and squeezed. When he relaxed his grip, the soldier fell across his feet, dead. Bile coated Aragon's tongue as he stared down at the man's slack face. Whenever we kill a part of ourselves, he thought. Shaking with a combination of shock, pain, and self-loathing, he walked back to where the fight had begun. Arya was kneeling beside a body, washing her hands and arms with water from a tin flask one of the soldiers had been carrying. How is it, asked Arya, you could kill that man, but you could not bring yourself to lay a finger on Sloane? She stood and faced him, her gaze frank. Devoid of emotion, he shrugged. He was a threat. Sloane wasn't. Isn't it